On a warm summer morning in Long Beach, California, the sun had barely risen when Sarah Martinez pulled into the cracked parking lot of Jerry's Diner. The neon sign above the entrance flickered weakly, still glowing from the night shift, as she grabbed her worn black apron from the passenger seat of her 2005 Toyota Corolla. At 32 years old, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity despite the exhaustion that seemed to permanently reside in her shoulders. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her uniform, though faded from countless washes, was always pressed and clean. As a single mother of two young boys, aged 7 and 9, she had mastered the art of making ends meet through sheer determination. Jerry's Diner wasn't fancy by any means. The red vinyl booths showed patches where they'd been repaired with duct tape, and the chrome trim along the counter had long since lost its shine. But to the regulars who frequented the establishment, it was a second home. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon welcomed customers as soon as they pushed through the glass door, its bell announcing each arrival with a cheerful ding. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early for her shift, just as she had done every day for the past 6 years. The morning cook, Miguel, greeted her with a friendly nod as he prepared the grill for the breakfast rush. The night shift waitress, Barbara, looked relieved to see her replacement arriving on time. "Rough night?" Sarah asked, noting the unusual number of coffee cups still scattered across the counter. Barbara shook her head, gathering her things. "Some bikers stopped by around midnight, stayed for hours. Decent tippers, though." She paused, then added, "Watch out for the group that said they'd be back for lunch. The leader's got a mean streak." Sarah nodded, having dealt with all types of customers over her years in food service. She began her morning routine, wiping down menus, refilling condiment bottles, and checking that each table had a full sugar dispenser. The morning light gradually filled the diner, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. The first customers of her shift began trickling in around 6:30 a.m. There was old Joe, a retired mailman who ordered the same breakfast every day: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and black coffee. Then came the construction workers from the site down the street, their yellow vests dusty even at this early hour. Sarah knew each of their orders by heart. What made Jerry's Diner special wasn't its food, though Miguel's cooking was reliably good. It was the sense of community that filled the small space. Sarah knew about old Joe's grandchildren in Arizona and how proud he was of their college achievements. She kept track of which construction worker was trying to quit smoking and made sure to congratulate them on each cigarette-free day. These small connections made the long hours and aching feet worthwhile. As the morning progressed, Sarah moved efficiently between tables, her notepad rarely leaving her hand. She had a special talent for remembering exactly when each coffee cup needed refilling, and which customers preferred their toast light or dark. Her smile, though tired, remained genuine as she greeted each person who walked through the door. Around 10 a.m. during a brief lull in service, Sarah took a moment to call home. Her boys would be getting ready for school, and she wanted to make sure they hadn't forgotten their lunch money. The phone behind the counter was reserved for emergencies, but Jerry, the owner, had a soft spot for Sarah and her situation. He pretended not to notice these quick morning check-ins. "Mom, Jason won't give me back my science book," her younger son complained through the phone. Sarah could hear the chaos of their morning routine in the background, supervised by Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor who helped get them off to school. "Put your brother on the phone," Sarah said firmly, watching as a new customer settled into booth 7. She quickly resolved the sibling dispute, reminded them both about their afternoon dentist appointment, and ended the call with "I love you." As she approached booth 7 with a menu and her order pad, Sarah had no way of knowing that this ordinary day was about to become anything but routine. The morning sun continued to shine through the large windows, creating patterns on the worn laminate tables, while the steady hum of conversations and clinking silverware filled the air. In just a few hours, this familiar space would become the setting for an encounter that would change not only her day, but would ripple through the entire community of Long Beach. The diner's bell chimed again as more customers entered, and Sarah straightened her apron, ready to greet them with the same professional warmth she showed to everyone who walked through Jerry's doors. Little did she know, she was about to serve one of the most memorable shifts of her career. The lunch rush at Jerry's Diner was in full swing when the distinctive rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot. Sarah Martinez was balancing 3 plates of burgers when she heard the engines cut off, followed by the heavy thud of boots on pavement. Through the large front windows, she could see 5 motorcycles lined up next to each other, their chrome surfaces gleaming in the midday sun. The bell above the door chimed aggressively as the first biker pushed it open. He filled the doorframe, a mountain of a man wearing a black leather vest covered in patches. His gray beard was wild and unkempt, and dark sunglasses covered his eyes despite being indoors. Behind him, 4 other bikers followed, their boots leaving dark scuff marks on the freshly mopped floor. The diner's regular customers seemed to shrink in their seats. Old Joe suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup, while the young mother in booth 3 pulled her children closer. The usual comfortable chatter of the diner died down to nervous whispers and the clinking of silverware. Back booth, the lead biker growled, pointing to the largest booth in the corner. His voice carried the rough edge of someone who had spent years shouting over motorcycle engines. His companions followed without a word, their leather vests creaking as they slid across the vinyl seats. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and grabbed 5 menus from the counter. In her 6 years at Jerry's, she had served all types of customers. She reminded herself that bikers were just people too, even if these ones seemed determined to look as intimidating as possible. "Welcome to Jerry's," she said, approaching their table with a professional smile. "Can I start you gentlemen off with some drinks?" She began distributing the menus, careful to maintain her usual friendly demeanor. The lead biker pulled off his sunglasses, revealing hard eyes that seemed to be perpetually squinting. He looked Sarah up and down in a way that made her want to step back, but she held her ground. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Coffee. Black. Lots of it." He didn't bother looking at the menu. "And make it hot. None of that lukewarm garbage you probably serve to these other folks." His companions chuckled, and Sarah noticed how the other customers were trying their best to avoid looking in their direction. Miguel peered out from the kitchen window, his usual cheerful expression replaced with concern. He had worked in enough diners to recognize trouble when it walked in. Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small nod, letting him know she was okay. As Sarah walked back to get the coffee pot, she could hear the bikers' loud conversation echo through the diner. They were discussing their ride from San Diego, peppered with language that made the young mother cover her children's ears. The lead biker's voice carried above the others, becoming louder with each passing minute, as if he was purposely trying to make everyone uncomfortable. When Sarah returned with the coffee pot and 5 mugs, she noticed the lead biker had spread himself out, taking up more space than necessary. His boots were propped up on the opposite seat, and his leather vest was now draped across the table, patches facing up as if daring anyone to look too closely. "Here you are, sir," Sarah said, carefully pouring the coffee. The steam rose in delicate spirals, the coffee fresh and hot just as he had demanded. "Are you ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes with the menace?" The lead biker grabbed his mug roughly, sloshing hot coffee over the sides. Instead of acknowledging the spill, he took a long, deliberate sip. His companions watched, and Sarah could sense something was about to happen. The tension in the diner had become almost unbearable. "This coffee," he began, his voice carrying across the now silent diner, "is exactly what I'd expect from a place like this." He set the mug down with unnecessary force, causing more coffee to splash onto the table. "Tastes like it was filtered through an old sock." Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart was beating faster. Through the large windows, she could see more motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. The day was about to get much more complicated, and she hadn't even gotten to take their food orders yet. In the kitchen, Miguel had stopped cooking, his hand hovering over the phone, ready to call Jerry if things got out of hand. The other customers had fallen completely silent, their meals forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. Nobody knew it yet, but in just a few minutes, an unexpected champion would walk through the door, completely changing the course of events at Jerry's diner. The tension in Jerry's diner continued to build as Sarah approached the bikers' table for their food order. The lead biker had spent the last 10 minutes loudly criticizing everything from the worn leather of the booths to the slightly crooked blinds on the windows. His companions laughed at each comment, their voices echoing off the walls of the now uncomfortably quiet restaurant. "Are you ready to order?" Sarah asked, her pen poised over her notepad. She had maintained her professional demeanor despite the growing hostility, though her hand trembled slightly as she wrote. The lead biker leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'll have the biggest burger you got. And it better not be as disappointing as this coffee." He shook his empty mug at her, the remaining drops of coffee splattering across the table. As Sarah reached to refill his cup, the diner's door chimed. The sudden movement of customers turning to look caused her hand to shake slightly, and a small amount of coffee splashed over the rim of the mug, landing on the biker's leather vest that was still spread across the table. Time seemed to freeze. The small brown stain on the leather looked enormous in Sarah's eyes. The lead biker slowly looked down at his vest, then back up at Sarah. His face turned a deep shade of red. "Are you blind or just stupid?" he bellowed, standing up so quickly that the table shook. His massive frame towered over Sarah, who instinctively stepped back. "Do you have any idea how much this vest costs?" The other bikers also rose from their seats, creating a wall of leather and denim. The few remaining customers in the diner watched in horror, while Miguel rushed out from the kitchen, still holding a spatula like a weapon. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Let me get something to clean that." "Clean it?" The biker interrupted, his voice rising even louder. "You think you can just clean a patch-covered vest like it's one of your cheap tablecloths?" He grabbed the vest from the table, holding it up to show everyone the small coffee stain that had dared to mar its surface. "Where's your manager?" he demanded, slamming his fist on the table. The coffee cups rattled, and several more drops spilled. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this dump." Sarah stood her ground, though her heart was racing. "Sir, I apologize for the accident. I'll be happy to pay for any cleaning costs." "Cleaning costs?" The biker let out a harsh laugh that contained no humor. "Listen here, waitress. This vest has been with me for 15 years. It's got patches that mean more than you'll ever understand. And you just carelessly dumped coffee on it." The other bikers had started to spread out, creating an intimidating semicircle around Sarah. The young mother who had been sitting in booth 3 quickly gathered her children and hurried toward the door, leaving money scattered on her table. Old Joe stood up slowly, his weathered face showing concern, but his arthritis and age prevented him from being much help. "Maybe if you weren't so busy trying to look pretty for the customers, you'd actually be able to do your job right," the lead biker sneered, stepping closer to Sarah. The coffee pot in her hand shook slightly, but she didn't back away. Miguel had reached the phone behind the counter and was quietly speaking to someone, his eyes never leaving the scene unfolding in his diner. The other customers sat frozen in their seats, witnesses to a situation that was rapidly spinning out of control. "I want compensation for this," the biker continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "And I don't mean just money for the cleaning. I want—" He never got to finish his sentence. The bell above the door chimed again, and a familiar figure stepped into Jerry's diner. The afternoon sunlight created a silhouette in the doorway, but everyone in Long Beach would recognize that tall, lean frame and distinctive walk. Snoop Dogg, accompanied by 2 members of his security team, stood in the entrance of the diner. He removed his designer sunglasses slowly, taking in the scene before him, the threatening bikers, the frightened customers, and Sarah, still holding her coffee pot like a shield. The lead biker, his back to the door, hadn't noticed the new arrival yet. He was still focused on Sarah, his face red with anger, unaware that the entire atmosphere in the diner had suddenly shifted. The other bikers, however, had seen who had entered. Their tough expressions faltered as they recognized one of Long Beach's most famous and respected residents. The confrontation was about to take an unexpected turn, and nobody in Jerry's diner would soon forget what happened next. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jerry's diner's windows as Snoop Dogg surveyed the scene before him. He had been quietly eating at a corner booth for the past hour, baseball cap pulled low, enjoying his usual order of chicken and waffles while working on his phone. His security team had maintained a discreet presence, allowing the rap legend to enjoy a peaceful meal in his hometown diner. From his vantage point, Snoop had observed Sarah's patient interactions with customers throughout her shift. He had watched her comfort a crying child with a free cookie, help an elderly man cut his meat when his arthritis was acting up, and maintain her composure as the bikers grew increasingly hostile. What others might have missed, Snoop had seen, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, even as her hands trembled slightly while serving the difficult customers. The rapper had been about to leave when the coffee incident occurred. Instead of heading out, he had texted his security team, who were waiting in the car, to join him inside. Now, as he stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a distinctive shadow across the diner's checkered floor, His expression was one of careful consideration. The lead biker remained oblivious to the new presence, still focused on berating Sarah. The other bikers had noticed, and their tough demeanor began to crack. One nudged another, whispering something that made them both step back slightly. The shift in their stance was subtle but noticeable to everyone watching. Snoop's security team positioned themselves strategically, one near the door, the other closer to the counter. They weren't just bodyguards. They were professionals who knew how to defuse situations without violence. Their presence alone changed the dynamic in the diner, like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Sarah, still holding her coffee pot, was the first to spot Snoop moving towards them. Her eyes widened in recognition, but she maintained her professional composure. She had served him several times before during his occasional visits to Jerry's, always respecting his privacy and treating him like any other valued customer. Old Joe, who had been halfway out of his seat ready to intervene despite his age, slowly sat back down. A small smile crossed his weathered face as he recognized what was about to unfold. The remaining customers, who moments ago had been frozen in fear, now watched with growing interest as Snoop approached the confrontation. Miguel, still behind the counter with the phone in his hand, quietly spoke into the receiver. "Never mind, Jerry. I think things are about to work themselves out." He hung up, knowing that the arrival of Long Beach's favorite son would change everything. The lead biker, still clutching his stained vest, continued his tirade, unaware that the atmosphere in the diner had completely transformed. "This vest means more than you'll ever understand," he was saying, his voice still loud but now the only sound in the otherwise silent diner. "Each patch tells a story. Then maybe you should be more careful where you put it, 'cause..." Snoop's distinctive voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. His words, delivered in his characteristic laid-back style, carried an undercurrent of authority that commanded attention. The biker froze mid-sentence, his face still red from yelling, but now tinged with something new, recognition. He turned slowly, his boots squeaking on the linoleum floor, to face the voice behind him. His angry expression morphed into one of surprise as he found himself looking up at Snoop Dogg. The rapper stood relaxed but purposeful, his presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a Long Beach basketball jersey, and his signature look of calm confidence. But there was no mistaking the power he carried, not just as a celebrity, but as a respected figure in the community. The other bikers had already begun to back away, creating space between themselves and their leader. The dynamics of power in the diner had shifted dramatically. What had started as a simple afternoon meal had transformed into something that would soon become a local legend. Snoop's eyes moved from the biker to Sarah, then back to the biker. His expression remained neutral, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he had seen everything. He had witnessed not just the coffee spill, but the entire pattern of harassment that had led up to it. And now, as he stood in the middle of Jerry's diner, it was clear to everyone present that things were about to change. The lead biker opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, suddenly unsure of himself. The confrontation was entering a new phase, and no one, especially the biker, was prepared for what Snoop Dogg would say next. The silence in Jerry's diner was absolute as Snoop Dogg took another step forward. His movement was casual but deliberate, like a chess player who already knew his winning move. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows caught the gold chain around his neck, creating brief flashes of light that seemed to emphasize the moment's significance. "You know what's funny?" Snoop began, his voice carrying its characteristic smooth drawl, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I've been sitting over there watching you try to make yourself feel big by making this sister feel small." He gestured toward his corner booth, where his half-finished plate of chicken and waffles still sat. The lead biker shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado evaporating under Snoop's steady gaze. The leather vest in his hands, which moments ago had been the source of such rage, now hung limply at his side. His companions had retreated even further, creating a noticeable distance between themselves and their leader. "See, I've been coming to Jerry's for years," Snoop continued, glancing around the diner. "And Miss Sarah here?" He nodded toward the waitress, who still held the coffee pot like a shield. "She's been nothing but respectful to everyone who walks through that door. Rich, poor, famous, unknown, doesn't matter to her." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. The restaurant remained silent except for Snoop's voice, every customer and staff member transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Now you're in here. Snoop's attention returned to the biker, acting like a small coffee stain is the end of the world. Making threats over an accident. He shook his head slowly. That ain't the way we do things in Long Beach, big man. The biker looked down at his vest, then back at Snoop. His face had lost its angry red color, replaced by a pale realization of his behavior. I didn't know you were here, he stammered. Snoop's expression hardened slightly. And that's the problem, isn't it? You thought nobody important was watching, so it was okay to disrespect this hard-working woman. He took another step closer to the biker. But let me tell you something. Everybody in this diner is important. Everybody deserves respect. Miguel, still behind the counter, nodded in agreement. Old Joe sat straighter in his booth, a proud smile crossing his weathered face. Even Snoop's security team, professional as they were, couldn't hide their approving expressions. That vest you're holding? Snoop continued, his voice taking on a teacher's tone. Yeah, it tells stories. But right now, you're adding a new story to it, and it ain't a good one. You're telling everyone here that you think it's okay to threaten someone over an accident. That you think it's cool to make a woman feel scared at her job. The biker's shoulders slumped. The other bikers had moved so far back they were nearly at the door. The transformation from intimidating gang to shamefaced group was remarkable to watch. I grew up in these streets, Snoop said, his voice softening slightly. Started from the bottom, just like most folks here. And you know what I learned? Real respect ain't about making people fear you. It's about how you treat people when you think nobody's watching. He turned to Sarah, his expression warming. Miss Sarah, how much do they owe for their coffee? Sarah glanced at the table. $8 for the coffee, but they haven't ordered food yet. Snoop reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted several $100 bills. This should cover their coffee, a new vest cleaning, and a proper tip for putting up with this nonsense. He placed the money on the table, then turned back to the bikers. Now, you all got two choices, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. You can either sit down, apologize to the lady, order your food like respectful customers, and show everyone here that you know how to make things right. He paused, letting his words sink in. Or you can leave, knowing that every time you wear that vest, the coffee stain will remind you of the day you got schooled on respect in Long Beach. The diner held its collective breath, waiting to see how the bikers would respond. The lead biker looked at his vest, then at Sarah, then at Snoop. The next few moments would determine whether this story would end with redemption or regret, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something they would talk about for years to come. The lead biker stood in the middle of Jerry's diner, his vest clutched in his hands, as the weight of Snoop Dogg's words settled over him like a heavy blanket. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows. The light now seemed to illuminate every flaw in his recent behavior, casting harsh shadows on his actions. Looking around the diner, he saw his reflection in different faces, the disappointment in old Joe's eyes, the lingering fear in Sarah's stance, the disapproval from other customers, and the shame in his own companion's expressions. But it was his reflection in the diner's window that struck him hardest. He barely recognized the man he'd become in the last hour. He started, his voice cracking slightly. The sound was so different from his earlier shouting that several customers looked up in surprise. He cleared his throat and tried again. I didn't. The words stuck in his throat as he realized there was no way to justify his actions. His mind wandered to his own daughter, who worked as a waitress in San Diego. How many times had she come home crying about customers who treated her poorly? How many times had he promised to have a word with anyone who disrespected his little girl? The irony of his current behavior hit him like a physical blow. Snoop remained standing there, his presence both calming and commanding. He wasn't just a celebrity in this moment. He was the voice of the community, a mirror showing the biker a truth he couldn't ignore. The lead biker's companions had clustered near the door, their earlier tough guy facade completely dissolved. One of them, a younger man with a fresh-looking patch on his vest, looked particularly uncomfortable, as if witnessing something that would change his perspective forever. Sarah had finally set down her coffee pot, though she remained behind the counter near Miguel, who had moved closer to offer support. The entire diner seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see how this moment would unfold. The biker looked down at his vest again, at the small coffee stain that had triggered such an outsized response. Each patch did tell a story of brotherhood, of freedom, of loyalty. But now he realized he just added a new story, one that contradicted everything these patches were supposed to represent. "My daughter," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She works at a diner too." He looked up at Sarah, really seeing her for the first time. She's about your age. The revelation seemed to physically deflate him. His broad shoulders, which had been puffed up with false bravado, sagged under the weight of his realization. The vest in his hand suddenly felt heavier, laden with the responsibility of the principles it was supposed to represent. "I've been writing for 20 years, he continued, speaking to no one in particular yet addressing everyone. "Got this vest when I first started. Added patches for every major moment." He ran his thumb over the coffee stain. "Never thought it would take a stain and a rap legend to make me see what I've become." Snoop nodded slowly, understanding flowing between the two men. The rapper had seen this moment of transformation before, when tough exteriors cracked to reveal the humanity beneath. The biker turned to Sarah, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time without aggression. "Miss," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." He laid his vest carefully on a nearby table, smoothing it out with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his earlier behavior. "What I did. How I acted." He shook his head, struggling to find the right words. "There's no excuse. I became everything I hate about people who disrespect service workers. Everything I tell my daughter's manager to watch out for." The diner remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer tense with fear, but rather heavy with the weight of this moment of truth and transformation. The biker's companions watched their leader's transformation with varying expressions of surprise and respect. The younger one with the fresh patch seemed to be taking mental notes, as if witnessing a different kind of lesson about brotherhood and respect than he'd expected when he joined the group. As the biker prepared to continue his apology, the afternoon sun briefly intensified, streaming through the windows and illuminating the scene in a warm glow. In that moment, Jerry's Diner wasn't just a local eatery. It was a place of transformation, where a man's perspective could shift completely under the weight of his own actions and the wisdom of an unexpected teacher. The transformation in Jerry's Diner continued as the lead biker took a deep breath and turned to fully face Sarah. His earlier intimidating presence had been replaced by genuine humility. The afternoon light softened, casting a warm glow throughout the diner as he prepared to make things right. "Miss Sarah," he began, his voice gentle and sincere, "I want to do more than just apologize. I want to make this right." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. Despite Snoop's earlier generous offering, the biker knew he needed to take responsibility for his own actions. Sarah watched as he pulled out several $100 bills, but before he could speak, she raised her hand. "Sir, Snoop already covered everything," she said softly. The biker shook his head, a sad smile crossing his weathered face. "This isn't about the coffee or the vest anymore," he replied. "This is about dignity and respect." He placed the money on the counter. "It's about showing my daughter that her father can own up to his mistakes." Snoop, who had been watching the exchange with approval, stepped forward. "Now that's what I'm talking about," he said, his signature smooth voice carrying across the diner. "Real men admit when they're wrong and make it right." The rapper turned to address the entire diner. "Matter of fact, lunch is on me today. Everybody in here, your meals are covered." A murmur of appreciation swept through the restaurant. Snoop's security team began quietly letting customers know they could order whatever they wanted. The lead biker's companions, who had been hovering uncertainly near the door, slowly made their way back to the table. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a mixture of respect and embarrassment. The youngest member of the group spoke up, his voice carrying across the now quiet diner. "Miss Sarah," he called out, "could we start over? Maybe get some menus and do this right this time?" Sarah smiled warmly and nodded, gathering fresh menus from the counter. As she approached their table, the atmosphere had completely changed. Where there had been tension and fear, there was now an atmosphere of redemption and respect. Miguel emerged from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee, his special blend that he usually saved for regular customers. He personally filled each biker's cup, adding his own gesture of forgiveness to the moment. Old Joe, who had witnessed the entire scene unfold, raise his coffee cup in a silent toast. Other customers began to relax, the regular buzz of diner conversation slowly returning. The young mother who had fled earlier cautiously returned with her children, and upon seeing the changed atmosphere, settled back into her booth. Snoop moved through the diner, stopping at each table, ensuring everyone was comfortable and taken care of. He paused at the biker's table, pulling up a chair. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. The bikers eagerly made room, still somewhat starstruck by his presence. As Sarah took their orders, each biker made a point to look her in the eye, say please and thank you, and speak with respect. The lead biker ordered his burger again, this time with a smile and an extra side of humility. The afternoon stretched on, and something remarkable happened in Jerry's diner. The bikers shared stories with Snoop about their rides, their families, and their lives. Snoop talked about growing up in Long Beach, the importance of community, and how small actions can make big differences. Other customers began joining in the conversation, the earlier divisions melting away. Old Joe shared tales from his postal carrier days, and Miguel brought out a special dessert he'd been experimenting with, turning the diner into an impromptu community gathering. Sarah moved between tables with renewed confidence, her earlier fear replaced by pride in how the situation had resolved. The coffee stain on the biker's vest had begun to fade, but the lesson it taught would remain clear and lasting. As the afternoon wound down, Snoop stood to leave, but not before making sure every customer and staff member felt the impact of the day's events. He pulled Sarah aside for a moment, speaking quietly with her, causing her to smile and wipe away a tear. The lead biker watched this interaction, the last remnants of his earlier anger completely dissolved. He understood now that this day would be remembered not for a coffee stain on a vest, but for a moment of transformation that touched everyone in Jerry's diner. The patch that marked this day wouldn't be visible on his vest, but it would be permanently sewn into his character. 3 months after the incident at Jerry's diner, the story had become a beloved local legend in Long Beach. The small restaurant had seen some changes, all for the better, and the lessons learned that afternoon continued to ripple through the community. Sarah Martinez still worked her regular shifts, but things were different now. The incident had transformed her into something of a local celebrity. Customers would request to sit in her section, not just for her excellent service, but to give firsthand about the day Snoop Dogg stood up for her. She told the story with grace, always emphasizing the power of transformation and forgiveness rather than the initial conflict. The lead biker, whose name turned out to be Frank Thompson, had become a regular at Jerry's. He came in every Sunday with his daughter Angela, who worked as a waitress in San Diego. They always sat in Sarah's section, and the two waitresses had developed a friendship based on their shared experiences. Frank's vest, with its barely visible coffee stain, hung proudly on his chair during these visits, a reminder of the lesson he'd learned. Jerry, the diner's owner, had framed a picture of Snoop Dogg with the staff, taken on that fateful day. It hung near the entrance, alongside a new sign that read, "Respect is always on the menu." The photo had become something of a tourist attraction, with people stopping by just to see it and hear the story. The young biker with the fresh patch had been particularly affected by that day's events. He started a social media campaign called Respect in Service that gained significant traction among motorcycle clubs across California. The movement encouraged bikers to look out for service workers and stand up against customer harassment. Old Joe, who still came in for his daily breakfast, loved to tell newcomers about how the atmosphere in the diner had changed. "It's like that coffee stain washed away more than just someone's anger," he would say, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "It showed us all how to be better." Miguel had named his special coffee blend Peaceful Rider in honor of the incident, and it had become the diner's most popular drink. Frank always ordered it with a smile, saying it was the best coffee he'd ever spilled on a vest. The story had spread beyond Long Beach, featured in local newspapers and social media. Food bloggers would visit Jerry's, hoping to capture some of the magic that had transformed an ordinary diner into a symbol of community and respect. But the regulars knew that the real magic wasn't in the viral story or the celebrity connection. It was in the daily small acts of kindness that had become the diner's trademark. Sarah had used some of the generous tips from that day to start a college fund for her boys. More importantly, she had gained a new confidence in dealing with difficult customers. Sometimes, when tension would arise in the diner, she would glance at the coffee stain on Frank's vest, and find strength in the memory of that day. Snoop Dogg still dropped by occasionally, always unannounced, always humble. He'd sit in his corner booth, order his chicken and waffles, and chat with whoever was around. His presence had become less about celebrity and more about community, a reminder that everyone deserved respect, regardless of their status. The incident had even inspired a tradition at Jerry's. Every year on the anniversary of that day, the diner hosted Respect Day, where bikers from all over California would ride in to show support for service workers. The parking lot would fill with motorcycles, and the diner would buzz with stories of kindness and transformation. Frank's biker group had changed too. They became known for their community service, often organizing rides to support local causes. The coffee stain story was shared at every new member orientation, a reminder that true strength lay in how you treated others, not in how much fear you could inspire. As the sun set on another busy day at Jerry's diner, Sarah looked around at her transformed workplace. The evening light caught the frame of Snoop's photo, casting a warm glow across the counter where Miguel was brewing another pot of peaceful writer coffee. Old Joe sat in his usual spot, sharing the story with a young couple who had driven from San Francisco just to visit the famous diner. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah smiled, ready to greet whoever walked in. Because at Jerry's diner, everyone who entered was more than just a customer. They were part of a continuing story of respect, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right, one cup of coffee at a time.